Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from Comcast, the Spencer Family, Chevron, Community Health System, Harris Ranch Resort, Producers Dairy, Caleb and Desiree House, Valley Children's Health Care, and The Wonderful Company. Additional support provided by from the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's public universities. This is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Blake Zante.
Welcome to the Maddy Report. I'm Blake Zante, Executive Director of the Maddy Institute. Each year since 2009, Capital Weekly, a journalistic publication in California, has published an annual list of the 100 most powerful movers and shakers in California politics and public policy, the top 100. This doesn't include elected officials. Instead, it looks at those who devote their professional lives to fighting for or against issues of state politics and policy, including Capitol staffers, lobbyists, bureaucrats, activists, labor leaders, fundraisers, agency heads, trade group presidents, and even journalists. Now we sit down with Rich Ehisen, editor of the Capital Weekly, to highlight just a few of the key influencers on this list. Rich, thanks for joining us on the Maddy Report today. Really appreciate you being on the program.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'd love to talk about the top 100, and I'm really pleased to be here.
Well, I know we've highlighted the top 100 in the past on the Maddy Report, so we're glad to have you back. Rich, tell us the origin story of this event. It's also an event in addition to a list. Why is it important for Californians to know who the key influences and players are in Sacramento that may be more behind the scenes rather than their elected officials?
Right. Well, as with a lot of things in this world, it started as a one-off. My predecessor, John Howard, and our original editor, Anthony York, who later was with the LA Times and then in government himself with the governor's office, and I think right now it's with the Tom Steyer campaign. They decided to do it as a one-off one year. It was a, kind of a slow time, and they said, hey, we should make this list of the 100 most influential or powerful people around the Capitol that are not elected. And they really did think it was going to be a one-time thing, but if you learn anything when you're around politics for any length of time, especially when you do something that is like this, that's got a ranking to it, the interest was tremendous, and the pressure immediately built to do it again the next year, and then the next year, and the next year. And so here we are. I think we're coming up on either year 18 or 19. I can't remember now.
And what's the process for selecting and evaluating these top 100?
Sure. And maybe a little bit to add on to the answer to the first question, too. Part of the reason that we do this is because it is important for people to know sometimes the non-elected people that are often the more influential people behind the scenes. Again, for those of us who cover this, you find out a lot of times electeds know what they know, but the staff, the consultants, all the people around them are the ones who really are the ones who carry a lot of institutional memory. And so that is part of my process. When I work on this list, and the funny story, the really abbreviated funny story, is when I first came to Capital Weekly to do this, at some point we were round robining it, and I asked, well, look, who's got to make the final call on all this? And everybody looked at me and said, well, you do. Oh, I guess that's a question I should have asked before I accepted this job. But anyway, what I do is I have a lot of clandestine conversations with people around the Capitol. I drink tons of coffee between April through June as I'm putting the list together. And, it initially is comprised of probably around 200 people. And then as time goes on, it gets whittled down to that 100. So it's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of research on my own. It's a lot of the obvious paying attention to what's going on. Election years are a little different from non-election years because then the fundraisers and the campaign managers and people like that come more into play than in years when maybe there's not an election campaign going on. But certainly it's me acquiring a lot of information from a lot of people who are in rooms that we poor scribes never get to be in.
And there are some key folks in the top 100 surrounding Governor Newsom, I'm sure, that come up in your coffee conversations. And it's no surprise, given the governor is not only an influential figure in California, but also has really vaulted himself to become a national figure. Just, briefly, who are some of the individuals ranked in the top 100 in the governor's circle?
Well, I mean, I would start with our number one, who is, of course, Nathan Barankin, his chief of staff. Previous to that, pretty much anyone who is the governor's chief of staff is going to be, if not number one, number two. And the only reason they wouldn't be number one during the Jerry Brown years, Ann Gust, his wife, was not the official chief of staff, but anybody who was around Jerry knew. I mean, Ann was the de facto chief of staff. So, but there's people like Jason Elliott, who has been a consultant and an advisor with Gavin Newsom since he was the mayor of San Francisco. Many, many other people that are in that, Jason Kinney, who's the co-founder of Axiom Advisors, a lobbying firm here in Sacramento area. He's been an insider with Gavin Newsom for as long as I can remember. Many, many other folks who are a big part of that. Dave Sapp, his attorney, Wade Crowfoot, who's the head of just about everything environmental in the state of California. A lot of other folks who are part of campaign consulting and strategizing. He's got a pretty, it's big, but it's also very tight. His circle of people around him a lot of them have been with him, like I say, since he was the mayor or lieutenant governor. So that's been quite a long time.
Certainly, and we'll be right back after this break just to talk more about that list. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're discussing Capital Weekly's top 100 most influential power brokers in the state of California with the editor of the Capital Weekly, Rich Ehisen. Rich, thanks again for joining us on the program. We were talking a little bit about the governor's circle before we went to the break, and it's likely that most Californians have never heard some of the names on this list that Capital Weekly puts together every year. But if you follow California politics closely, you know who these players are. Maybe shifting gears a little bit, who are some of the most influential lobbyists around the Capitol that are on this list?
Sure. I mentioned Jason Kinney before. Now, he hasn't always been a lobbyist. He's been more of a consultant and strategist, but he is now a registered lobbyist. His partner, Cassie Gilson, they're both Axiom. People like Scott Wetch. If it involves labor in the state of California, I have had many people inside the circle say, there's lots of influential leaders of unions, but if you really want to get labor on your side, you got to get Scott Wetch on your side. And he's a lobbyist. He's not, doesn't head a union or an association. So there are definitely people like that. There are some, people like Tia Orr, who is the head of SEIU 1000. That's, the SEIU union in California. Really, really important. I mean, very little happens in this state around the Capitol without SEIU having a big role in it one way or the other. So those are some names that definitely maybe the average person wouldn't know. But actually, I'll give you one more that people may remember. Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher, who was an assembly member who resigned a few years ago to become the head of the Cal Labor Fed. Again, extraordinarily influential in labor circles. And Jennifer Barrera, the head of the California Chamber of Commerce. I mean, these are people who are huge, huge players in the Capitol, but could probably go unnoticed in most restaurants.
People generally have a negative connotation of the word lobbyist. Why do you think that is in your experience, and what do lobbyists actually do?
What they're generally doing is, they are representing the interests of their clients to the best of their ability, and I think how they do that is determined by the size of the client they're working with.
And what institutional players, specifically key staff people within the California legislature, play a significant role in shaping the state's policy? We talked about lobbyists and maybe some folks that are a little bit more external, but earlier you mentioned, committee consultants and staff that often have spent more time in the legislature than their member that they're working with or working for has. So who on that list is maybe more of an institutional person that made the top 100?
I think right away is somebody like Jason Cisney, who is the budget guru for the Assembly. Has been around for many, many, many years. really incredibly influential on when it comes to anything to do with the budget. I think of somebody like Kip Lipper, who, for my money, is the most influential environmental consultant probably in the history of the state. There's virtually nothing that's happened on that front in the last half century that Kip was not intimately involved in one way or another. And doesn't show any signs of retiring anytime soon, and so likely to continue in that role for a long time. There are people in all of the major committees, whether it's appropriations or judicial or health, that many of them have been around through many administrations, many governors, many legislative leaders, and they are again, their institutional memory is far beyond anyone who's elected to office. So those are the folks that we think about when we talk about the really influential consultant class.
Thanks, Rich. We're going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back after this. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back to the Maddy Report. We're talking with Rich Ehisen, editor of the Capital Weekly, about California's top 100 list. Rich, thanks again for joining us on the program today. Are there any leaders on the list who maybe may come as a surprise to some Californians?
I don't know about a surprise, but there's a fair amount of representation here from some of the tribal entities, and have been for a long time. People like Mark Maccaro, Lynn Valbuena, folks from Siniga and Tassin. The tribal entities have a lot of influence around the Capitol. They have a lot of money, and as Jess Unruh once famously said, money is the mother's milk of politics. So they're very influential. Somebody like Terry Holloman, who, full disclosure, is on our board at Capital Weekly with the CTA. The teachers are huge players in the Capitol. I think of somebody like Dave Sapp, who is Gavin Newsom's in-house attorney. Again, most people could not pick Dave out of a crowd of two, but as you've seen with all of the legal issues we've had with the federal government in this last year, right in the heart of all of it. Viviana Becerra, who's the chief of staff for Attorney General Rob Bonta. Her reach is incredible because of how many different entities around that are within the AG's purview that are then really in her purview, because she's more of the hands-on person for many of the things that the AG's office is doing when it comes to getting down to the nitty-gritty of things. So those are some folks there that again, most people would not recognize those names, but boy, they are incredibly influential around the Capitol on a daily basis.
Now, with this being Governor Newsom's last year as governor, could we potentially see a massive shift in potential top 100 leaders in the future? Certainly a lot of your influence revolves around your connections around the Capitol, right? And so with a transition, do you foresee maybe a lot of movement, or would this list, potentially have a lot of continuity over the next several years?
Well, I don't anticipate a ton of change from the governor's sphere this year. Next year is going to be a whole different story, but how much will depend on who ends up ultimately being elected. Because yes, if it is, a Javier Becerra or somebody like that, they're going to come in with and probably have a lot of players who are very familiar to people here in the Sacramento region. Whereas if it is somebody completely outside of that sphere, and especially, let's say, if it's a Republican, especially somebody from outside, the norm, like Steve Hilton, yes, it would be completely different. You would see probably some of the biggest turnover in terms of the list in a decade at least. But even a Katie Porter or an Eric Swalwell, if one of them were to be elected, Swalwell is from Northern California, but he's spent most of his elected career in D.C. So, you'd probably see a lot of folks coming from that realm. With Katie Porter, you might see a lot of folks coming from from Southern California, in their history. So yeah, again, this year, I don't think we're going to see a ton of it, though. I do try to take a very fresh look at the list every year and to look at, entities or, folks we maybe haven't looked at in the past, and seeing if there's, more reason to consider them for this year. You might also see some folks that have been on the lower rungs of the list in recent years moving up. because of some things that have happened here in California with Prop 50 and some other things. But so this year, I think we'll see about a normal transition rate. Next year, I anticipate very, very good chance that we'll have a pretty significant turnover on the list.
Now, one of the reasons why the Maddy Institute has the Maddy Report is to help connect everyday viewers in the Valley, everyday residents with their policymakers, policymaking process, and help provide information. I think sometimes there's this notion that a select group of individuals sort of holds a lot of the power around the policymaking process. Does that select group really wield a lot of power in Sacramento? As we're talking about this list, or do you think that there are still opportunities for everyday Californians to engage and influence their legislators in the policymaking process?
I think in recent years, the legislative leaders have done a better job of including a broader mix, a little bit more of a bipartisan mix when it comes to, especially on things like the budget. And I do think there has been a little bit more of a willingness to listen to the other side. I know people don't always see it in the way we do, but I do think it is there. And I do think it is important for people to stay involved in the process because I tell you, they do pay attention. They really do. Now, our situation, with the Democrats here having a supermajority, there is always going to be those who don't care what the other side thinks, right? But there's a lot more that do care and do want to see progress. There's a caucus now in the legislature called the Problem Solvers Caucus. And it's one of the really new caucuses. And I think there's about 50 caucuses, but it's one of the brand new ones. And it's got its own foundation. It's funded. It's got staffing. And it's got a really interesting mix of both parties involved in a lot of issues that they agree on. And I highly recommend, if you haven't looked them up, check them out a little bit. They are really trying to solve issues like housing and transportation and fuel costs and energy costs, and they're trying to be practical in ways that matter to real people. And so they are interested in hearing from their constituents. So yeah, I really hope nobody feels like, hey, I can't make any difference. Believe me, phone calls, emails, showing up at town halls, it matters.
We'll be right back after this break. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're concluding our conversation on the top 100 list with Rich Ehisen, editor of the Capitol Weekly. Rich, thanks again for joining us today on the program. Really appreciate your time and insights around California's state capitol and some of the key players who are involved. I want to shift gears a little bit to the Capitol Weekly. I think a lot of folks in the Valley may not be familiar with the Capitol Weekly publication, and so maybe you could talk a little bit, what are some of the other unique columns or features that the Capitol Weekly produces that may differ from other traditional publications?
Sure, I appreciate that question. So, we do a podcast, and so every week on Monday we post our podcast. So that's and we try to really connect with a broad range of people around the Capitol. Both sides of the aisle, agency heads, other people that are influential in one way or another. We try to do that. I have a couple of regular features that we do with a guy named Chris McKaylee, who's a law professor at McGeorge, but one of the most brilliant parliamentarians that I've ever seen. And so we have a couple of columns from him a week addressing, one is on parliamentary issues, and another one is a great look at what's ahead in the week. It's called the McKaylee Minute. So if you wanted to get a really quick snapshot on what is coming up in the Capitol that week, every Monday on the on our website, my philosophy is we don't try to necessarily compete with the LA Times and Politico and everything. They have more resources than we do. So we try to focus in on things that I consider to be very important to people that are not just the top of the fold things that are getting everybody like me is chasing. So, we do try to profile lawmakers a lot. We try to look at issues like gaming. We look at issues like the lobbying industry. We look at, again, a lot of other issues that are maybe not just the top of the fold kinds of things that everyone is chasing. So, for us, we try to give the kind of insight that respects our readers, respects their intelligence, and, for the most part, for people who want to just get an idea beyond just the screaming headlines, that's what we do.
Thank you for that. And where can people go to support the Capitol Weekly or read your work and tune into your podcast?
Sure. You can always go directly to the website. That's capitalweekly.net. You can find the Capitol Weekly podcast on all of the major podcast platforms. You can subscribe to the Roundup, which is our daily newsletter we put out, which has our stuff, but also a collection of news stories from across the spectrum, from the Times and Politico and the Chronicle and Cal Matters and et cetera, et cetera. Those are all three ways you can read us. But, like I said, you can find us on all the social media platforms as well. We put most of our stories up there. All of our podcast stuff, all ends up there too. And, we welcome, comments. I would say there is one thing that definitely makes us a little unique from everyone else. I think we're the best landing spot right now for any of the publications for opinion columns. We run them 4 days a week right now. We moved to 5 days a week during the really hot times of session, especially around budget and stuff, because I get an overwhelming number of them. But we're a good spot for those, because I think a lot of people complain that they send an op-ed into the pub and then it never sees the light of day. We can get very busy too, but I try to make sure everybody gets within reason. The only thing I would ask, please, if you think you're going to submit an op-ed, please go to our site first, look at our submission guidelines. I'm really rigid about them because when we get so many, that's the only way I can cull them apart. But yeah, we're a good spot for that, and it's a good sharing tool for people trying to learn about other things going on around. And we actually get quite a few from the Central Valley. It's really interesting how many we get from down your way.
Well, Rich Ehisen, thanks again for joining us on the Maddy Report today. It was a pleasure having you back on.
Hey, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. You guys do great work.
And thanks for tuning into the Maddy Report. While the Maddy Institute is affiliated with the Valley's 4 public universities, most of our funding comes from private donors and individuals like you. To learn more about the Maddy Institute and how you can support the ongoing work of our organization, visit themaddyinstitute.org. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.com.